Welcome to this deep dive. Ever wonder how companies make sure their products don't, fall apart the second you get them home?
Right.
That's where quality assurance technicians come in, kind of the unsung heroes of, product reliability.
Definitely.
So today we're using 25 interview questions and answers, all for QA technicians,
Mm-hmm.
as our roadmap to understanding this whole vital role.
It's a pretty good resource, actually.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, because those questions, it's not just about the right answer or whatever. It's they kind of reveal those, core skills
Right.
and knowledge you need to actually be good at QA.
Yeah.
It's like a peek behind the curtain.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
how companies build that trust with their customers through quality.
Okay, so let's unpack this thing. Our source jumps right in and says, quality assurance technicians are, essential for manufacturers to meet, consumer expectations.
Sure.
But also, regulatory compliance.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty big deal, isn't it?
It is a big responsibility.
Yeah.
It really highlights those two sides of the coin, I think, when it comes to QA.
What do you mean?
Like protecting the company's reputation, yeah, of course, but also making sure those products meet safety and industry standards too.
Oh, right.
Ultimately, it's all about keeping us, the consumer, safe and, happy with what we buy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So the source goes on to describe their work,
Okay.
like inspecting products and materials, recording all that data.
Right.
But then, and this is key, identifying and resolving the issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not enough to just point problems. They're actually finding solutions.
Exactly. It's not about being a what is it? Like a quality cop.
Uh-huh.
They need that problem-solving mindset,
Yeah.
to figure out why something's wrong
Yeah.
and then how to actually fix it.
Oh, okay.
Imagine like a QA technician looking at a smartphone screen
Okay.
and they find a defect.
Uh-huh.
They don't just flag it and move on.
Right.
They dig deeper. Is it a manufacturing problem? The materials? That's where the detective work begins.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
It's a lot more investigative than I thought at first. Speaking of skills, though, what qualities make a really great QA technician?
I think our source nails it down to three big ones.
Okay.
Attention to detail,
Makes sense.
problem solving, and then communication too.
Yeah.
And those are all connected in really cool ways.
Oh, how so?
Say, for example, a QA technician is testing a new car,
Okay.
specifically the braking system.
Mhm.
They notice, some weird stuff with the braking distance
Oh,
under certain conditions.
okay.
Attention to detail, that's step one.
Yeah, I can see how that'd be super important, especially with car brakes. What happens next?
That's where the problem solving comes in.
Right.
You got to isolate the cause, Is it a software problem? Maybe a sensor's messed up?
Oh, yeah.
Worn brake pads? They
Yeah.
have to be able to analyze the system,
Yeah.
maybe even run more tests to really narrow it down.
So it's not just about finding the problem. It's about understanding why it's happening.
Exactly.
But hold on, where does the whole communication thing fit in?
It's essential at every step, actually.
Well, really?
Yeah, imagine our QA person figured out the root cause of this brake issue.
Okay.
We got to explain that to the engineering team clearly,
Mm-hmm.
explain the problem, the impact it could have, and their fix too.
Right.
And this is where being able to talk about technical stuff in a way anyone can understand is super important.
Makes sense, because if they can't explain it well, then nothing gets fixed.
Exactly.
Like a chain reaction, right?
Yeah.
Attention to detail
Mm-hmm.
leads to problem solving,
Uh-huh.
which then needs communication to actually, make a difference.
Precisely. And think about what that means on a bigger scale.
Okay.
Clear communication, that means everyone knows what the problem is and how bad it could be.
Right.
And that can prevent delays, having to redo a bunch of work, even safety hazards later on.
Wow. Okay, so we've got our detail-oriented, problem-solving communicator. Let's get him to work.
Uh-huh. All right.
Our source, it outlines a 4-step process for testing a new product.
Yeah.
First up, got to understand those product specs, right?
Yep. Those specs, those are the blueprint, They tell you everything the product should be,
Mm-hmm.
from how big it is to how it works,
Okay.
Imagine you're testing a brand new coffee maker.
Okay, yeah.
Those specs would say the brewing temperature, how much water it holds, even what the carafe's made of.
That makes sense, yeah. That reminds me, I bought this new coffee maker once.
Yeah.
And the carafe, it just shattered when I poured hot water in.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I bet someone missed something in the specs. or during testing.
That's a great example of where things can go wrong. A good QA technician would use those specs to, make a test plan.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
their guide for what to test and how.
Gotcha.
Could be like stress tests, push the coffee maker to the limit, or even just using it to see if it makes sense.
So it's more than just does it turn on.
Exactly.
It's about like does it work the way it should safely and in all kinds of situations.
Yep.
That's where the expertise is, right?
Yeah. And then once testing's done, every little observation, all the data, that's all got to be written down.
Really. Documentation.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound too exciting.
I know, but it's actually super important for quality assurance.
Huh. Okay, why is that?
It's the foundation for, analyzing all that data and making things better over time.
Okay.
Those notes about each test, each flaw, everything that gets changed, that becomes like a history of the product.
Ah.
It's not just about recording what happened.
Right.
It's about finding patterns and trends.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. It's like a case file for the product or something.
Exactly. Like imagine with our coffee maker, right?
Yeah.
The documentation might show that a certain batch of carafes, they always cracked during testing. So by analyzing that data, they could figure out why.
Okay.
Maybe something's wrong with how they're made, or maybe the glass itself is bad.
Right.
And then that information, that goes back to the design and production folks, and you get stronger carafes and, of course, happier coffee drinkers.
So documentation is not just about looking back. It's about making the product better in the future.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. But let's face it, things don't always go perfectly right.
Of course not.
So what happens when a QA technician runs into, a tricky situation?
That's when things get interesting. Our source material, it throws in some curveballs.
Okay.
And this is where the human element of the job really comes out.
Uh-huh. Like what?
What if, for example, a QA technician thinks a coworker is cutting corners on quality?
Oh, to meet deadlines.
Exactly.
Ooh, that's a tough one. What should they do?
It's not always clear cut,
Right.
Our source says start by talking to them directly.
Right.
Maybe the coworker's feeling pressured or they weren't trained properly.
Yeah.
Just talking might solve it before it becomes a bigger deal.
That's a good first step. But what if talking doesn't work? Or it's like a really serious thing.
Well, then it's important to report it. A supervisor or manager.
Right.
Remember, a QA technician, their main responsibility is to the consumer, right?
Right.
And sometimes protecting them means, taking a stand, even if it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, that makes sense. What other challenges might they run into?
Imagine this. You're sure something's wrong with a product,
Okay.
but you just can't prove it.
Hmm.
The tests don't show anything for sure, and you don't have any real evidence.
That's got to be frustrating. I think I'd keep testing just until I found something.
That's one way to do it, but it might not be the best use of your time,
Okay.
Our source says to do research and work together in those cases.
Right.
Talk to your colleagues, look through old documentation, even ask outside experts. It's all part of the process.
So it's like they're putting a puzzle together.
Yeah.
Using all the tools they have to find those missing pieces.
Exactly. And speaking of puzzles, one question that always comes up is, how often should you be testing?
That's a good question.
It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of answer, is it?
I'm guessing it depends on the product.
Yeah.
You probably don't need to test a pencil as much as like a medical device or something.
You got it. Our source points out that testing, how often you do it, depends on how complex the product is
Okay.
and how risky it is.
Right.
Like a simple, low-risk thing that might just need checks every once in a while.
Uh-huh.
But for stuff with higher stakes, medical equipment, airplanes, even the software in self-driving cars, that testing needs to be constant and super thorough.
Now that you mention it, there are tons of products where frequent testing is like essential.
Right.
What comes to mind for you?
Well, medical devices, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
You wouldn't want a pacemaker failing because it wasn't tested enough.
No, definitely not.
And think about airplanes. Every single part, the engines, the navigation system, that's all under constant scrutiny.
Wow.
Even everyday stuff like the software on our phones, that's constantly getting updates and tested to, fix problems and make things work better.
It's kind of amazing how much we depend on quality assurance without even realizing it.
Right.
This deep dives gave me a whole new appreciation for the work that goes into, making sure the stuff we use is safe and actually works.
It's a hidden world, but it has a huge impact.
Yeah.
There's still so much more to explore.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's continue this deep dive into quality assurance after a quick break.
Sounds good.
Ah,
Welcome back. We're still deep in this world of quality assurance technicians.
yeah, it's pretty fascinating, isn't it?
It really is. We've talked about like the technical stuff, the problem-solving mindset,
Mm-hmm.
but going through these interview questions,
Mm-hmm.
it's clear that communication skills, those are just as important.
Oh, absolutely.
Earlier, we were saying how they need to communicate with, engineers and other team members.
Yeah.
But I bet their audience goes beyond that, right?
You're exactly right.
Like, who else?
Think about it. A QA technician might have to write reports that go all the way up to management.
Oh.
They got to be able to, tailor their message different audiences.
It's not just about being a good writer. It's about understanding, like, who you're talking to and what they need to know.
Exactly. Like a super technical report.
Yeah.
That might be perfect for an engineer,
Uh-huh.
but an executive,
Right.
they probably care more about how these quality issues affect, their goals and their profits.
So a QA technician kind of has to be a chameleon, changing their style depending on the situation.
You got it. They might be explaining some complex issue to a developer 1 minute,
Yeah.
and then the next giving a summary to a manager who doesn't have that technical background.
Yeah, that's a good point. One question that stood out to me was about working on a team of QA technicians. Yeah. To test the same product.
Okay.
What's the advantage of having multiple people testing?
Oh, that's a great question. It really shows how much collaboration is involved in quality assurance.
Okay.
When you've got a whole team of QA folks working together,
Mm-hmm.
you get all these different experiences, skills, even personalities,
Yeah.
all looking at the same problem.
It's like having different sets of eyes, each with their own perspective.
Exactly. One person might be a software expert,
Uh-huh.
another might know all about hardware.
Right.
Working together, they can catch a wider range of, potential problems.
And having multiple people probably reduces bias, too.
Oh, for sure.
Like if one person misses something,
Yeah.
someone else will catch it.
Absolutely. It's like a built-in system of checks and balances.
I like that.
And it's not just about finding problems either.
Well,
It's about coming up with solutions.
Okay.
A team of QA folks, they can bounce ideas off each other. And that leads to more creative and effective ways to improve a product.
So far, we've been talking about the teamwork aspect. But I imagine there are times when a QA technician has to work alone,
Definitely.
maybe even in some pretty tough conditions.
You're right. Our source material mentions experience working in unpleasant or hazardous environments.
Okay, now I'm picturing like hazmat suits and goggles. What kind of situations would that be?
Well, think about testing a product that, works in extreme temperatures.
Oh, like a furnace or a freezer?
Exactly. Or maybe they're working with stuff that has hazardous materials,
Got it.
chemicals, or even radioactive substances.
Wow, that's pretty intense. It takes a certain kind of person to do that, right?
It does, and it really shows how dedicated they are at their work. They know their job is crucial for keeping people safe.
Yeah, it's true. We just assume the things we use are safe,
Right.
but it's thanks to them that we have that peace of mind.
Exactly. They're the unsung heroes of quality, protecting us from potential harm behind the scenes.
Okay, so we've talked about the technical skills, the problem solving, the communication,
Mhm.
but what about the personality stuff?
Oh, you mean the soft skills?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Are there certain characteristics that are like super important for a QA technician?
That's a good question. Technical expertise is important,
Yeah.
but it's not enough on its own.
Okay.
A really good QA technician, they need a certain personality type to do well in this kind of job.
Like what? I'm curious.
Yeah, well, first of all, they got to be detail-oriented.
Right, we talked about that.
Yeah, but it's super important.
Right.
A QA technician has to be able to spot even the tiniest little flaw or inconsistency.
Yeah.
Like a hawk, always looking for something out of place.
So someone who likes precision and accuracy,
Yeah.
would you say they also need to be like okay with repetitive tasks?
Oh, absolutely. Patience is key in this field.
Makes sense.
Testing can take a long time, and it often involves doing the same thing over and over and over again.
Right.
A good QA technician needs to stay focused and motivated.
Even when things are boring.
Exactly. What else? Adaptability is crucial too.
Okay.
Technology is always changing,
Mm-hmm.
and QA is no exception. So a QA technician needs to be able to learn new skills, adapt to new processes, be okay with change.
Someone who's comfortable outside their comfort zone.
Exactly. And lastly, I'd say they need a strong sense of ownership and responsibility.
In what way?
They're the ones guarding quality, and they need to take that seriously.
It's not just a job. It's like a commitment to making sure things meet the highest standards.
Exactly. They're making a real difference
How so?
by protecting consumers and making sure the products they work on are good.
We've talked a lot about the specifics of this role, but I'm thinking about the bigger picture.
Okay.
How does quality assurance fit into a company's overall strategy?
Oh, that's an excellent question.
Is it just a cost of doing business?
You know, for a long time, people saw quality assurance as like a necessary evil.
Really?
Yeah, just a cost center that didn't really add value.
But I'm guessing that view is changing.
It is, yeah.
How so?
Companies that are, thinking ahead, they're
Yeah.
realizing that quality assurance isn't just about preventing defects.
Yeah.
It's about building a whole culture of excellence.
Interesting.
It's about creating products and services that are, at least as good as what the customer expects.
Right.
And that leads to happier customers, loyal customers, and of course, more profits.
So it's an investment, not an expense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you do quality assurance, right, it
Right.
can really make a business successful.
In what way?
It can help companies stand out from their competitors, build stronger brands,
Yeah.
even make things more sustainable
What do you mean?
by, reducing waste and making products last longer.
That's a good point. It's not just about checking boxes. It's about creating real value
Yeah,
for both the company and the customer.
exactly. And it's about everyone in the company working together to ensure quality.
It's not just the QA team's job.
Right. It's a shared responsibility.
That makes sense.
It should be in every department, at every level.
It's about creating a culture where everyone cares about quality.
Exactly. And when that happens, amazing things can happen.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Products get better, processes become more efficient, customers become more loyal.
What?
Everyone wins.
This has been a really insightful deep dive.
Mhm.
We've learned so much about quality assurance technicians.
Uh-huh.
But there's one question that's been on my mind.
Okay, what is it?
It's about the big picture again.
Okay.
There's this one question in our source material.
Yeah.
It asks about a situation where a QA technician thinks there's a problem with a product,
Uh-huh.
but they don't have enough evidence to prove it.
That's tough.
What do you think is the most important thing for them to do in that situation?
That's a tricky one.
Yeah.
It's something a lot of QA technicians will face in their careers.
Right.
And it requires a balance, persistence, diplomacy,
Yeah.
and trusting your gut.
It's about knowing when to push for more investigation
Yeah,
and when to step back and reassess.
exactly.
What advice would you give to a QA technician in that situation?
I'd say trust your instincts. If you think something's wrong, don't just ignore it,
Right.
but don't jump to conclusions either.
Yeah.
Get as much information as you can, write down everything you find, and then present your concerns clearly and objectively.
So it's about being a detective, but also a good communicator.
Exactly. And sometimes you just won't have all the answers right away.
Yeah.
It might take time, persistence, and working together to find the truth.
It's a good point. Quality assurance isn't always about quick fixes.
No.
It's about being thorough, persistent,
Mm-hmm.
and dedicated to finding the best solutions.
Well said. I think it's time to wrap things up.
Yeah, I agree. We've covered a lot.
We have.
And I hope our listeners have a better understanding of what quality assurance technicians do.
Me too. They're the unsung heroes of quality.
Yeah.
And we owe them a lot for making the world a safer and better place.
So for our listeners, here's something to think about.
Okay.
Next time you use something that just works perfectly,
Mm-hmm.
take a minute to appreciate all the work the QA professionals did.
Yeah.
Their attention to detail, their problem solving, their commitment to excellence
It all makes a difference.
every single day.
Until next time, stay curious.
And we're back, ready to wrap up our deep dive into the world of quality assurance technicians.
Yeah, it's kind of wild how much we've already talked about everything from the specific tests to the big impact quality has on a company.
I know, right?
Eh,
It's like with every question we go through from this list of interview questions for QA technicians,
mhm.
we uncover another layer of how complex this whole thing really is.
Speaking of layers, there was that question about which industries QA technicians usually have the most experience in.
Oh, yeah. You mentioned automotive, aerospace, medical devices.
Right. Those are the fields where quality is super important.
If something goes wrong, there are huge consequences.
Exactly. But It got me thinking about all the other industries where QA is essential, even if it's not so obvious.
Oh, that's interesting. Like, we always think of QA with, physical things.
Uh-huh.
But what about services? Do they need quality control too?
So absolutely. Just think about, like, the software we use every day.
Okay, yeah.
Imagine a bug in a banking app. That could be a disaster.
Sure.
Or glitches in medical software. That could even be, life-threatening.
Wow. Okay, so those QA technicians in the software world, they're basically protecting our digital lives.
Yeah, in a way. They test the software, find and report bugs, and make sure updates go smoothly without creating new problems.
It's making me realize that quality assurance is everywhere, way more than I thought. What
Yeah.
about industries like food production or pharmaceuticals?
Yeah.
Those quality standards must be incredibly strict.
You're right. In those areas, it's not just about making customers happy, it's about public health and safety.
So QA technicians there, they're almost like protectors, making sure those products are safe to use, don't have contaminants, and follow all those regulations.
Exactly. It's amazing to think about the impact of their work.
What do you mean?
They might be testing a batch of medicine in a lab,
Uh-huh.
but that affects so many people who rely on those drugs.
Yeah, it's incredible to think about all that impact, often without anyone even knowing. They really are the unsung heroes of quality, making sure everything we use is safe, actually works, and is reliable.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I think that's the main thing to remember.
What's that?
Quality assurance isn't just a cost.
Yeah.
It's an investment in making things better.
It's about creating a world where we can trust the products we use, the services we depend on, the systems that, run our lives.
Well said. And for our listeners, here's a challenge. The next time you use something and it just works perfectly, take a second to think about all those QA professionals who made that happen.
That's a great point. Behind every successful product or service, there's a whole team working hard to make sure it's high quality.
Their attention to detail, how they solve problems, their dedication to excellence, it makes our lives better every single day.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into the world of quality assurance technicians.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating journey.
Until next time, stay curious.